Identity has long been a central concept across the human sciences and philosophy, yet it resists final definition. It's invoked in questions as intimate as "who am I?" and as collective as "who are we?" While social scientists typically treat identity as a product of social, cultural, and psychological processes, philosophers interrogate its metaphysical status, logical coherence, and existential significance. So this video it's my attempt at comparing these two approaches, examining the construction and negotiation of identity in social science alongside the metaphysical and existential puzzles of identity in philosophy. And the analysis suggests that, at least to me anyway, that identity is simultaneously indispensable for social life and inherently unstable when subject to philosophical scrutiny. So we're going to start with the social science perspective. So constructive, relational, and performed. So within the social sciences, identity is conceptualized as socially constructed and relational rather than as an essence that individuals simply possess. It emerges from the interaction between personal self-understanding and social categories, cultural narratives, and institutional structures within which individuals are embedded. Psychological approaches often distinguish between personal identity, the individual's self-conception grounded in memory, traits, and values, and social identity, the sense of self derived from group memberships. So, social identity theory posits that individuals derive self-esteem and meaning from their membership in social groups, which also structure dynamics of inclusion and exclusion. Thus, identity is both a source of belonging and a potential basis for intergroup conflict. The anthropological, I always struggle to say that word, anthropological perspectives emphasize identity's cultural dimensions. Traditions, practices, and narratives provide frameworks within which individuals locate themselves. However, these frameworks are neither singular nor static. Crenshaw's concept of intersectionality highlights that identity categories such as race, gender, and class are interlocking, producing experiences that cannot be understood through a single axis of analysis. Identity, from this perspective, is always multiple, layered, and context-dependent. Judith Butler's theory of gender performativity pushes beyond the notion of identity as an internal possession. Butler argues that gender identity, for instance, is constituted through repeated performances regulated by cultural norms. Identity is enacted rather than innate, stabilizing over time through repetition, but always open to contestation and change. So this understanding destabilizes the idea of identity as a fixed core, instead framing it as an ongoing performance. A recurring theme in social science is the tension between agency and structure. While individuals actively construct and negotiate their identities, they do so within social categories and institutional frameworks that limit their possibilities. Identity, therefore, is co-produced, simultaneously constrained by external classification and appropriated by individuals in ways that can resist, reinterpret, or reinforce those classifications. So that is the social science perspective on identity, and that was quite a quick look at those ideas. They are deep ideas, they're quite complex ideas, and they are definitely worth further exploration. But for the purposes of this video, I think that was probably enough to get the point across. So let's look at it from the philosophical perspectives, so the metaphysical and existential dimensions. Philosophy approaches identity through questions of persistence, sameness, and the nature of selfhood. Rather than emphasizing cultural negotiation, it seeks to uncover what it means to be a person or any entity, to remain the same over time, and how individuals should understand and live out their identities. John Locke's essay concerning human understanding famously argued that personal identity is founded on continuity of consciousness, particularly memory. However, this theory produces paradoxes. If one forgets past experiences, is one still the same person? Parfit radicalized Locke's insight, suggesting that that identity is not a deep further fact, but reducible to psychological continuity and correctedness. For Parfit, what matters for survival is not identity per se, but the persistence of psychological relations, even if strict identity is lost. This view undermines the assumption that identity is metaphysically robust. The Ship of Theseus paradox further illustrates the metaphysical problem. If every plank of a ship is replaced, is it still the same ship? Applied to human beings, if bodily and psychological elements change over time, what secures identity? Philosophical inquiry reveals that identity is precarious and perhaps more of a conceptual convenience rather than an ontological reality. Let's think about this now from the numerical versus qualitative identity perspective. So philosophers distinguish between numerical identity, being one and the same entity, like A equals A, and qualitative identity, sharing properties as with two identical copies of a book. So a person is numerically identical with themselves across time, yet qualitatively transformed through aging, memory loss, and change. Thus, personal identity straddles sameness and difference, creating a paradoxical condition in which one is both continuous and ever-changing. Existentialist philosophers shift the problem from logic to lived experience. For Søren Kierkegaard, identity is a task, one realized through faith and selfhood before God. Jean-Paul Sartre, by contrast, denies any essential self. Existence precedes essence, and identity is continually created through choices. This radical freedom renders identity as an ongoing project, but also as a source of anguish, since one is condemned to be free. Heidegger deepens this by portraying selfhood as being in the world, constituted by temporality and the confrontation with mortality. Authentic identity arises when individuals embrace their finite possibilities rather than dissolving into impersonal social roles. There is another idea that we call narrative identity, which proposes that essentially narrative identity is a synthesis of change and continuity. We maintain identity by telling coherent stories about our lives, weaving together past, present, and future. Identity is not a static substance, but a hermeneutic process. It is made intelligible through narrative interpretation, always open to revision as new experiences and perspectives emerge. Post-constructualist, I struggled to say that word, thinkers further destabilize the concept. So Michel Foucault contends that identities are effects of discourse and power rather than natural categories. Derrida demonstrates that identity is constituted by difference and deferral, never fully present to itself. Non-Western traditions often echo this skepticism. Buddhist philosophy, through its doctrine of what is the actual word? I can't remember the actual word, but it basically means no self. But through this doctrine, maintains that clinging to a permanent self is delusion, as reality is itself characterized by flux and interdependence. So when we place the social science view and the philosophical views side by side, it reveals both divergence and convergences in their treatment of identity. So social science investigates identity as a social and psychological phenomenon, emphasizing its relational and performative aspects. Philosophy interrogates identity's metaphysical and existential coherence. Social science views identity as constructive, multiple, and context-dependent, while philosophy exposes its logical paradoxes, existential fragility, and possible non-existence. In social science, identity organizes social belonging and serves as the basis for political recognition and rights. In philosophy, identity grounds questions of persistence, responsibility, and authenticity. So despite their differences, both traditions converge in portraying identity as inherently unstable. Social scientists demonstrate that identity is historically contingent and socially negotiated, while philosophers reveal its metaphysical incoherence and existential precariousness. Yet identity remains indispensable. Socially, it provides recognition and orientation. Existentially, it frames responsibility and self-understanding. Thus, identity is best understood as both constructive and elusive, necessary for human life, yet impossible to secure as a fixed essence. So the comparative analysis of identity in social science and philosophy demonstrates the richness and complexity of the concept. Social science highlights its social construction, cultural negotiation, and performative character, while philosophy exposes its metaphysical paradoxes, existential tensions, and narrative dimensions. Taken together, these perspectives suggest that identity is not a settled possession, but a process, a dynamic interplay of social categories, personal narratives, and ontological puzzles. Identity, in this sense, is less an answer to the question, who am I, than an ongoing task of negotiation between who we are told we are, and who we take ourselves to be, and who we might yet become. So that is a very, very brief and not especially deep look at what identity is, or at least some of the ideas that are floating around in the world about what identity is and what it means. But there is so much more to be said on this subject that I couldn't possibly get it in a 15-minute video. I probably couldn't get it in a 15-day video, to be perfectly honest. Identity is a deep subject, and the more we think about it, the deeper it gets. But it's quite a hot topic in the world, and it is, and not just right now. I think for as long as humans have been humans, it's been a hot topic. It's been something that's on our minds all the time. Who am I? Who are we? You know, these are important questions, but they're not important because of the answers that we get from them. They're important questions because those questions lead us down different avenues of thought. And that's the important thing. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it made some semblance of sense. And if you have any questions or you want some deeper insight into any of the views that we very briefly touched on in this video, then please jump in the comments and I will make some more content to answer those questions. So thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate your time and I hope you have a wonderful day.